the catastrophe theory. I'll tell you right from the start that perhaps it's my personality, but I'm not attracted to the worse is better theory. I think worse is often just plain worse. And somehow the notion that out of the rubble is going to spring forth this fully grown racial solidarity, and that whites are going, my brother white, you know. I think when there's blood in the streets and the power's cut off, I'm not convinced that whites aren't going to be shooting each other as much as they're shooting anybody else. But how can we judge the extent to which crisis really does develop racial consciousness? I've scratched my head over this question, and I've tried to look into it to the extent that one can look into it seriously. And for example, take the American Depression, the Great Depression. Unemployment was at 25%. A whole lot of people were suddenly impoverished. This was a real crisis. It marked my parents' generation. To what extent did that experience raise racial consciousness in the United States? It's not an easy question to answer. But one thing that I've done is I've looked into the statistics on the lynchings of blacks, for example. And if you look through the worst Depression years, you'll find that during this gradual downtrend in numbers, the Great Depression had no effect, no discernible effect on the lynching of blacks. You might expect that a racially rekindled and reawakened white society might have lynched more blacks. I don't know if this is a fair index, but that is what you will find. Likewise, if you look at the differentials in unemployment for blacks and whites for that period, blacks were unemployed at higher rates than whites, but again, if racial solidarity blossoms from the ruins, you would think that they would suddenly be thrown out of work at greater rates. Again, there's a kind of parallelism in unemployment, that blacks didn't suffer in any kind of particular way from greater unemployment. So now there are probably many other aspects of the Depression that I can't claim to have done an exhaustive study of how this affected the racial thinking of whites. But at least by those two indices that I looked into, there's not much to go on. At the same time, some of you, of course, remember the Argentine crisis of 1999 to 2001. It was a serious situation. They had 25% unemployment. They defaulted on their sovereign debt. There was rioting. There were deaths. And in 2001, the president of Argentina, Fernando de la Rua, he declared a state of emergency. He got on a helicopter and did a bunk. He just left the presidential palace. You're talking about a serious crisis for a country. Now, again, I cannot claim to be exhaustively knowledgeable about what the social circumstances were like as a result of that. But I see no evidence that there was more persecution of the small number of non-whites who live in Argentina. I just see no evidence that this resulted in the kind of awakening that some people predict for the United States. Then finally, just a final example here is the current Greek crisis. We've got this debt crisis. Last summer, again, there was rioting. People are getting shot down. Their sovereign debt is downgraded to junk. The Greek parliament is cutting the public sector and hiving people off jobs. And traditionally in Greece, there has been a national movement that occasionally takes it out on the Turks and the Albanians and the Gypsies and the Africans. I see no evidence that those groups are mixing it up with those minorities any more than before. And even more important, I see no evidence that there is a broader acceptance of that kind of thing than there was before the crisis. And then finally, of course, we are living in what's considered the worst economic disaster since the Great Depression. And again, I don't see anything that is easily pointed out as a kind of sign of nascent racial consciousness that can be attributed to that. At the same time, I think those who insist that only from catastrophe will our salvation come, I'm not convinced necessarily there will be the kind of blood in the streets, the power gets turned off kind of catastrophe. I'm not sure. Furthermore, If that is what you think really is necessary, then presumably you should be in favor of more and more Somali Bantu immigrants who don't know how to use a light switch. You should be in favor of the power grid going out. You should hope for infectious diseases and epidemics. I can't bring myself to hope for those things. Maybe I'm just a sentimentalist, but it's difficult for me to hope that these things are going to happen. So I think that instead of expecting this kind of deus ex machina, we have to think in terms of the practical hard slog of what we can do. And I think the things that we can do legitimately and practically will, of course, prepare the ground should there be a catastrophe of the kind that I'm describing, and would mean that this catastrophe would result in this kind of flowering that people may hope for.